Hi family, it's me, Sally. Just wanted to come on today and share some thoughts of mine. I just want to think out loud about a few things. I want to share some more connections with 2030. But first of all, I want to get into the story with Abraham and Isaac when Abraham was giving up Isaac for a sacrifice, and then I will get into the connections after that. So this is Genesis chapter 22, and I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I'm going to point out the highlights. The phrase "here I am" is always it repeats itself in so many scriptures with the prophets. When God would call them, they would say, here I am," which is basically saying, I'm here, Lord, send me. And so there's a lot of scriptures that talk about here I am. Then in verse 2, God tells Abraham, take your son, your only son, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah. That reminds me of when Jesus was baptized, the voice came from heaven and said, this is my beloved son, in whom I am well pleased. Also, Moriah was the same area that Jesus was crucified. And he became our offering for our sin. And then verse 3, so Abraham rose early in the morning and saddled his donkey. The donkey, Jesus rode on a donkey, a foal of a donkey. That would be 4 days before Passover. So that week he rode on a foal of a donkey. So I will get to the connections, but so there was 2 donkeys, and I will explain why later. And then he took 2 of his young men with him, and Jesus was crucified in the middle between 2 criminals. He split the wood and arose and went to a place of which God had told him. And then verse 4, it mentions the 3rd day that Abraham lifted up his eyes. If you look up verses about lifting up your eyes, it's an act of worship, and that's exactly what Abraham was doing. He lifted up his eyes because he was going to offer his son as a form of worship to the Lord in obedience. And then verse 6, he talks about Abraham took fire in his hand and a knife. Now fire is always a symbol of judgment. So God the Father had judgment in his hand, and he imputed that upon Jesus on the cross. That's why it went dark in the land and other parts of the world as well. It went completely dark for the last 3.5 hours of when Jesus was on the cross. And the knife represents the piercing of his hands, his feet, and his side. And the 2 of them went together. So as Jesus was walking up the road, to Calvary to be crucified, God the Father was right there with him, alongside him. The two of them walked up the road together. I thought that was amazing. Verse 7, he says, my Father. So Isaac was crying out, my Father, which is the same as Jesus cried out to God the Father, will you take this cup from me? Then he says, nevertheless, not my will, but thine be done. Wow. And again he says, here I am, my son. Look, the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering? Then Abraham said, my son, God will provide for himself the lamb for a burnt offering. So the two of them went together. Again, the two of them went together on the road to Calvary. That's incredible. God provided himself the sacrifice. So this is all a picture of Jesus' sacrifice on the cross for our sin. So they came to the place which God had told him, and Abraham built an altar there and placed the wood in order. And he bound Isaac. And Jesus, when he got arrested in the Garden of Gethsemane, they bound Jesus and they led him away. And then verse 10, Abraham stretched out his hand and took the knife to slay his son. Again, Jesus laid on the beams as they nailed his hands and his feet to the wood. Also, Isaac, I forgot to mention this, Abraham put the wood on Isaac's back as he walked up to the place where he was going to offer him as a sacrifice and build the altar. So then the angel of the Lord is always referred to Jesus, a pre-incarnate Christ. It's an appearance of Jesus in the Old Testament. The angel of the Lord. So that was Jesus appearing to Abraham and saying, do not harm your son. For now I know that you love me, because you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. You fear God. And again, Abraham lifted up his eyes. That's an act of worship. And he saw a ram caught in a thicket by its horns. Now this is powerful. The thicket is referred to thorns and thistles. And Jesus had to have a crown of thorns on his head. And the reason why is because he had to reverse the curse that was placed upon the earth itself back in Genesis chapter 3, when God cursed the earth after the fall of man. So Jesus had to have the crown of thorns to reverse that curse. So I thought that was incredible. And then verse 14, the Lord will provide. That was the name of the place. Then the angel of the Lord called to Abraham a second time. Remember that. So this is the second time he called out to him. I will bless you and multiply you, because he feared God. He was obedient to God. So there's that. Now, I want to show you a verse in in Galatians about Abraham. So that is Galatians chapter 4, and I'll let you read verses 21 through 31. It's about the two covenants, and it talked about with Hagar, that's the woman of bondage, which is referring to with the flesh. But we have the covenant with Abraham based on faith. It was accounted righteousness to Abraham because of his faith. So we are children of the promise. That's in verse 28. Now we, brethren, as Isaac was, are children of promise. But as he who was born to the flesh then persecuted him who was born according to the Spirit, even so it is now. So that's an important verse. We are children of the promise. We have the same faith that Abraham had, and we have Christ's righteousness imputed to us because of our faith. Okay. Now I wanted to, in regards to back in Genesis 22, verse 13, the ram was caught in the thicket by its horns. So the ram is a male, most definitely, and the horns, so that would be two horns. Now I want to point out what two symbolizes in the typologies with the bride of Christ. Number one, there's two trumpets. There's one for Israel and one for the bride of Christ. That is listed in Numbers chapter 10, verses 1 through 3. Now when Paul talks about the last trump in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, the bride of Christ will get the last trump. The first trumpet was blown in Exodus chapter 19. So, but we get the last trump. So there's two trumpets. Jesus was two goats. He was the scapegoat and also the sacrificial goat. And you can read about that in Leviticus chapter 16, verses 8, 10, and 26. The "here I am" phrase is mentioned twice in Isaiah. This is a very powerful verse. Isaiah 65, 1 through 3. It says, I was sought by those who did not ask for me. I was found by those who did not seek me. I said, here I am, to a nation that was not called by my name. I have stretched out my hands all day long to a rebellious people who walk in a way that is not good, according to their own thoughts. A people who provoke me to anger continually to my face, who sacrifice in gardens and burn incense on altars of brick. Anyway, the Lord says, here I am, twice. and it's to the Gentiles, a nation that was not called by my name. Wow. That reminds me of Leah. Leah is a type of the bride of Christ, and Rachel is a type of Israel. And of course, Jacob loved Rachel. That was his first choice. But he ended up with Leah first, and then he had to work another 7 years so he could have Rachel. Well, that's a type of the 7-year tribulation that God's going to have to work for an extra 7 years to get Israel, to claim Israel for himself. So that's interesting. 2 donkeys, of course, I already shared about the 2 donkeys. A foal, they actually have a cross in the fur. So as Jesus was riding on the foal, which is the young donkey, he saw the cross in the fur as he was riding through the streets during that Palm Sunday. Amazing. The 70 who are sent out, that's in Luke chapter 10, they were sent out by 2 by 2 in pairs. 2 lambs for sacrifice. When Jesus was put on the cross at 9 a.m., the Jews were sacrificing the first lamb for the morning sacrifice. And then the second lamb was sacrificed at 3 p.m., which was the exact time when Jesus gave up the ghost and said, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." So there's 2 lambs. 2 specific typologies of Christ that are extremely powerful in the Old Testament. Joseph and Isaac. Joseph took a Gentile bride before the 7 years of famine. Isaac took a Gentile bride, and the servant of Abraham went to try to find a bride for Isaac. And he met, so that was Eleazar, and he met with Rebekah by a well, and he claimed her, and he also asked her if she wanted, if there was a way that they could lodge at her place, and she said yes. So Eleazar, which represents the Holy Spirit, was with Rebekah 2 days. Again, you can't make this stuff up. 2 is always referred to 2,000 years for the Gentile bride. Luke chapter 10. I wanted to show you something in that chapter. The Good Samaritan story. The Good Samaritan in that story is a type of Christ. And the wounded man is a type of Israel, and they will be wounded and afflicted when they go through the 7-year tribulation. The 2 denarii is 2 days worth of pay, so that represents the 2,000 years. Then he says in verse 35, whatever more that money that you need, when I return, I will repay you. I looked up that word repay, that means reward. And that goes along with the verse, Revelation chapter 22, verse 12. When I come, behold, I will bring my reward with me. So that parable is literally talking about Jesus with the 2 days worth of pay, so he will return, and that will be on the third day for the Jews. But for the Gentiles, it's 2 days. So we get 2,000 years exactly. And then the second coming will be on the third day for the Jews. How do I know that? That is Hosea chapter 6, verses 1 through 3. Come, let us return to the Lord, for he has torn. He will heal us. He has stricken, but he will bind us up. After 2 days, he will revive us. On the third day, he will raise us up, that we may live in his sight. Let us know, let us pursue the knowledge of the Lord. His going forth is established as the morning. He will come to us like the rain, like the latter and former rain to the earth. So you see, the Jews at the second coming, they get 3 days. So it'll be on the third day for the second coming. We get 2 days. I wanted to point out some verses in John. John chapter 2. It's the wedding in Cana. It says, on the third day there was a wedding feast. This is a type. This is a dual prophecy for the future. So yes, it happened then, but it's also referring to the wedding feast during the millennial kingdom after the second coming. And it mentions third day. So we know that's connected to Israel. The other thing, it mentions 6 water pots. 6 water pots represents the 6,000 years of human history. That's the sheet right here. The rapture happens between 5,000 year and 6,000 year. The millennial kingdom will be day 7. The eternal state will be day 8. It's just like the work week, but in year format, thousands of years. That's 2 Peter 3, verse 8. A day is 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is 1 day to the Lord. So it mentions 6 water pots containing 20 or 30 gallons apiece. There's 20, 30 mentioned right there in that chapter. Do you think that that's a coincidence? I do not. It is not a coincidence. I was watching a sermon on the inheritance of Zebulun, and there was all kinds of rapture typology in that sermon, and it was based on Joshua chapter 19. And so I looked up, well, when was Zebulun born? I wanted to know some more details about Zebulun and its connection. Why was it connected to the rapture? Zebulun was Leah's 6th son. There's that 6 again. That means 6,000 years. So the end of, so 6,000 years, that will be the second coming. Leah's sixth son. And that is in Genesis chapter 30. And guess what verse that's in? 20. There's your 2030. You can't make this stuff up. This is not a... I don't believe in coincidences. I really don't. There's too much similarities. Joseph in the Old Testament was sold for 20 shekels of silver. Jesus was sold for 30 shekels of silver. Do you think that's a coincidence? Again, no. That's 2030 again. So I thought I would share that with you. We need to be born again. So we need to be born twice. You need to be born as a human being, yes, but we need to be born again in order to be right with our God the Father. John chapter 10. We are kept in the Son's hand, and we are also kept in the Father's hand. So that's a double grip. So that's John chapter 10, verses 28 and 29. And I think I already talked about Jacob had 2 wives, so he ended up with Leah first, and then he got Rachel. He had to work an extra 7 years for Rachel. Rachel represents Israel, and Leah represents us. Abraham was 75 years old when he left Haran. Let's see here. So that's Genesis chapter 12. Yep, he was 75 years old when he departed from Haran. And Israel is 75 years old right now. They will turn 76 years old in May of 2024. I am extremely hopeful that we get raptured this year, or most definitely, I would say before they turn 76 years old. Because we are Abraham's children. We, because of our faith. So, I just thought I wanted to share these things with you. The other thing I forgot to mention is 40. The typology of 40. 40 is always the number of testing, trials. The Israelites were in the wilderness for 40 years to be tested by God. Moses went up on the mountain 40 days and 40 nights. Jesus was tempted by the devil 40 days and 40 nights in the wilderness. 40 is a very significant number as far as testing, a time of trial and testing. What happened in 70 AD? That was when the Romans destroyed the Jews' temple, and that was on the 9th of Av. And they were dispersed all over the world, and millions of them were killed. Well, back up from 70 AD, back up 40 years. That is 30 AD. Again, I don't think this is a coincidence. I believe that's when Jesus was crucified. in 30 AD. Now, I think he was at least 33 years old, but I do believe he was crucified in 30 AD. Jesus prophesied the destruction of the temple. That is in Matthew 24. So once he prophesied it, it was a done deal. He spoke it, and it was done. So, I don't know, just some things to think about. So, anyway, that's all I have for you. And just wanted to come on today and share the scriptures with you and pray about it. Study these things yourself. And yeah, so that's all I have for you today. And hang on, saints, we're almost home. I really do not believe that we have years left. No. It might be months, or it could be weeks, or it could be days. But it's going to be real soon. So, and I can't wait. So, okay, guys, I love you, and I'm praying for you. Let's keep praying for each other. Okay, bye.